So we got into the studio and I unpacked my gear and Bob said, "Hey, let's do Only a Hobo." Well, Only a Hobo was not a hit by anybody, but he had recorded that song on the first studio album that I was ever on in my life, and that was a benefit for Broadsides magazine, which took which we did in 1963. I believe it was January 63 at Folkways Records studio. And in the studio, and you can picture this one large room with a control room and a little hallway outside. So we went in, and in this little studio were Pete Seeger, who had been my main inspiration and hero all my life, Bob Dylan, who was there recording under the name Blind Boy Grunt because he was already contracted to Columbia, so he couldn't use his real name. Phil Oakes, who I met there for the first time. Mark Spolstra, who was a wonderful singer and 12-string guitar player. The Freedom Singers from Albany, Georgia, who were fabulous Southern gospel and civil rights singers. Peter Lafarge, who represented American Indian music, Native American music. It was just an amazing session, and one of the songs that Bob played on that was Only a Hobo. So him saying, "Let's do Only a Hobo" was obviously a throwback 10 years or so earlier to that session, I assume. I assume he associated me with that song. So I believe we did 2 takes of that song. I played banjo and sang harmony, and Bob played guitar and sang the main part, of course. And then Bob said, "Let's move on." And I just thought, okay, he hated it. It was no good. I don't know what I did. It was, there was no playback. It wasn't like, let's listen and see how we like it. Let's fix this. Let's do this. It was nothing. It was just like, okay, next. And so literally 40 years later was the next time I heard Only a Hobo that I played and sang with Bob. The story, I was having dinner in New York City at an Italian restaurant, my wife Jane and I, with a dear friend named Eric Anderson. Eric's been a friend since the 60s. And we were having dinner with him, and he was working on an album, and his engineer and producer named Steve Adabo, a wonderful guitar player and audio engineer, came in to join us at this Italian restaurant in Midtown Manhattan. And he looked at me and he said, "I've just been mixing a song that you're on." I said, "What? What are you talking about? I'm not on any song. I don't know what you mean." He said, "Well, I've been hired by Dylan's office to make a new one of his bootleg albums. And this one was called Another Self-Portrait. And he said, I've just been mixing Only a Hobo from your 1971 session." And this was in 2000 and something. Now, it was literally 40 years later. And my jaw almost fell to the floor. How does something like this happen? And I had literally never heard it. So he sent me a mix of it, and I listened to it on my computer, and I said, "Holy mackerel, this is actually pretty damn good."
Fantastic.
I was singing, I couldn't possibly sing that high anymore. I was singing a really high harmony part. My banjo was pretty passable, my banjo playing. And obviously, all those years later, Bob did not think it was terrible, because even though he never said a word to me afterwards about it, it appeared on that record, which turned out to be actually a very good record. There were some fabulous songs on it that were outtakes or
Yes.
never been things that had never been recorded before. So that was just a huge surprise for me.